My Subaru Forester, seen in my older videos, was totaled 2 years ago when a lady ran a red light and hit Lucy and me. While that car is now long gone, I continue to receive a lot of questions about various details and modifications I made. And while much of that information is available on the channel, because the build was a continuous work in progress, that information is spread out across many videos spanning a couple of years. So here is one final Forester video, and I'm going to try and tell you about every mod I ever made to this car. An important detail is that this build was on a very tight budget. At every turn, I looked for the least expensive way to accomplish the upgrades I wanted. If you have some money to spend on your Subaru, there are certainly much better ways to approach much of what I did. If you want to see how I gradually built what proved to be an enormously fun and capable little overland rig on an absolute shoestring, keep watching. First of all, the car itself. This was a base model 2012 Subaru Forester with a naturally aspirated 2.5-liter engine. I frequently get asked about X-Mode and CVT transmissions, but the 2012 Forester had neither of those. Equipped with Subaru's proven 4-speed electronic automatic transmission and a remarkably effective traction control system that would transfer power from a lifted wheel to the wheel on the ground. I never got around to installing the torque locker on my Forester because it was already very good at managing diagonal wheel lift and getting me up rutted trails. When I bought this car, I had been doing a lot of backroads travel on paved roads, and I just wanted the ability to explore a little further when the pavement ended on those backroads. I had no thoughts of off-road obstacles, camping, or overland expeditions, so my initial mods were superficial changes to the appearance. My first mod was to black out the grille and emblems with Plastidip. Plastidip has its ups and downs, but it's straightforward to work with, nicely forgiving, and easy to touch up when needed. Next, I added the Rally Innovations light bar. This is a largely cosmetic mod. The way it bolts on, it doesn't offer any significant protection, but with lights mounted, it's a nice look. The cheap lights I got off Amazon helped a little on dark trails, but were not terribly effective. I ordered the emblem overlays from JDMFV.com. This was like $17 at the time, and you could choose from assorted designs and color combinations. I opted for a glossy black JDM Forester emblem on a matte black background. I ran the car like this for about a year, then finally started looking at more functional mods. I took the very low-budget approach of a 1-inch spacer lift from Anderson Design and Fabrication, with an additional 3/8-inch spacer in the rear to help combat the saggy bum. This was the only suspension change at the time, no replacement to springs or struts for the moment. Next came wheels and tires. The wheels are the Boxer made by Black Rhino, and these are 15x7 with a +15 offset. These looked great on the car, but that basket design was kind of a hassle to clean. Tires were the BF Goodrich TA KO2 in 215/75 R15. This is a little bigger than the OEM tire size, but not so much that it made a perceptible difference in the speedometer. The KO2 is a relatively heavy tire, and the car could feel it. It is probably overkill for most Subaru drivers. However, these performed extremely well on the trail, as well as in fresh snow, and the sturdy construction was reassuring on my many treks across the deserts of central and eastern Oregon on primitive unmaintained roads strewn with sharp, jagged lava rock. I do have a dedicated video about my experience with the KO2s on the Forester. You'll find a link in the description below. I was able to fit a full-size spare in the trunk by deleting the foam tray that normally sits under the cargo floor. As I found myself roaming further than day trips could take me, I created a very simple build-out to level the back for sleeping and accommodate a basic kitchen, built almost entirely of scrap material I had around the garage. I do have a walk-around video from this era of the Forester. I'll put a link in the description if you want to get a more detailed look at this version. With no budget to buy a real awning, I came up with an inexpensive DIY version. I ran this on the side of the car initially, but after buying a small used awning off of a buddy for cheap, I moved the DIY awning to the rear, where it was ultimately more useful over my kitchen area. You'll find a link below to my dedicated video about the DIY awning. I upgraded the lights on the Rally Innovations bar to Hella's Black Magic halogen driving lights. I loved this look on my Forester, though those lights were pretty ineffective in actual use on the trail. There was a basic roof basket on the car when I bought it, but I found it impractical to use for my excursions, so I removed it and built my own roof system, which included an older Thule Summit roof box and a rack constructed of Unistrut. I was so happy with how this worked out that I ended up adapting it to my replacement rig after the Forester was totaled. I have detailed videos about both of those roof rack builds, links below. I added an inexpensive Auxbeam light bar to the roof rack. This was provided by Auxbeam for me to test and review. This light bar was better than I expected for the $80 price tag at the time. It did get moisture inside and the mounting hardware rusted, but the light itself remained effective. I'll put a link to the dedicated review video. At some point, I fashioned my own front skid plate. I made this out of a relatively thin piece of scrap aluminum I found for cheap at the steel yard, which I cut, drilled, and bent to fit. While this certainly didn't provide as much protection as commercially available skid plates on the market, it did help the car glance off and skim over obstacles, and ultimately I never suffered any issues from hitting stuff underneath. At the time of the accident, I had been working with S-Sphere 4x4 to outfit the Forester with their 1/4-inch aluminum skid plate, but the car was totaled before this process was complete, and I returned the plate to them. My current truck is now armored by S-Sphere, and these plates have stood up to a ton of abuse. Because I was sleeping in the car, I had all of the rear windows tinted with the darkest ceramic film available. This was a nice improvement in privacy, but also surprised me by how much cooler it was in the car on sunny days. After a couple years of sleeping in the car, I was ready for more spacious accommodations. While it was great having a rigid shelter and a bed always ready with no setup at all, squirming around inside this cramped space, and especially trying to get dressed, was uncomfortable and impractical. I decided to move to the Gazelle tent and develop a more functional build-out in the back of the Forester. That meant dealing with more setup and breakdown every night and morning during overland expeditions, and occasionally dealing with wind, rain, and snow, but this was an undeniable improvement over the claustrophobic situation in the back of the Forester. I have a video about this setup as well. You'll find a link below. As I'd had some approach angle issues with the Rally Innovations light bar, I ended up selling it and installing ADF's light mount designed for the 3rd Gen Forester, and took the opportunity to mount Diode Dynamics' tiny but powerful SS3 pods. I moved those Diode Dynamic pods to my current rig where they continue to light my way on the trail. I have videos about both the SS3 pods and the ADF light bracket. Links below. One of my favorite mods to the Forester was chopping the rear bumper, deleting the massive stock mufflers, and having the rear portion of the exhaust customized with a single tiny muffler. This resulted in a huge improvement to the departure angle, with the added benefit of giving the Forester a subtle but satisfying rumble that was not loud or obnoxious. You'll find a link below to a complete video about this mod. Diode Dynamics released a new, smaller version of its LED pods and asked me to test these out as well, so I set these up as backup lights. It had been very difficult to see in reverse at night with the dark tint on the windows, and these pods made all the difference. I do have a dedicated video about them as well. Frustrated with storing garbage in my roof box, where it would heat up and smell awful on summer excursions, I came up with a trasheroo style solution using a waterproof Czech Army backpack I found for $15 on a military surplus site. This worked out so well that I moved it to my truck build. I have a short video with more details about my trash solution, which I will link below. Inspired by the success of my rear bumper cut, I decided to improve my approach angle by eliminating the lower portion of the front plastic bumper cover. This was partially in preparation for eventually building a steel bumper and mounting a winch, but the Forester was totaled before I got to that project. I did end up completing this on my truck instead, chopping that front end as well and fabricating a lightweight winch bumper. Videos about all of this are linked in the description. Towards the end of the Forester's life, I replaced the stock rear springs with King standard height springs. Even with the 1 3/8 inch lift in the rear, the Forester sat pretty low fully loaded. At less than $200 for the pair of springs, this mod was entirely worth it, and my only regret was that I hadn't done it much sooner. It made a massive difference in how the Forester sat when loaded, making me far less prone to hit obstacles in the trail, and to me it actually improved the ride, which has always felt a little too squishy in this car. If you're going to disassemble your suspension, or pay someone to do it, in order to install a lift, I would recommend spending a little extra money to upgrade your springs at the same time, so you don't have to tear it all apart again later on, as I did. When we installed the springs, I took the opportunity to delete the rear sway bar for some improved suspension travel. I did not notice a significant change in body roll, probably aided by the stiffer rear springs. That was the final mod to the Forester. I hope this compiled summary of every mod to my Forester answers your questions. You'll find a lot more information about many of these mods in the dedicated videos linked below. Thank you for watching.